Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Tom.
Hi, I'm Stephanie.
It's our culture unit for the month of September as we kick off the month of September. Hopefully, you're all back in school now and getting down to your studies. But someday you may have the chance to travel. And if you do travel, you might go to Japan to check out their kimonos or their Japanese-style clothing.Yeah,
I don't own one myself, but I did wear one in a play. I was a Japanese lady. Tea House of the August Moon, I still remember in high school. They're kind of thick, and there's a lot of cloth to them, so I didn't think they were very comfortable. And I was also...in a pretty warm state. So if it's hot outside, I think it would be tough to wear a kimono. Have you ever worn one, Tom?
No. I understand they're very difficult to put on, and I guess they're for the ladies usually. But there are different kinds, and a couple different varieties of kimono can actually be worn by men or children or whatever. So yeah, there's not just one type of kimono. There are many types, which we'll talk about in the next couple of days. So let's begin our lesson right now by reading through the first part, and then we'll come back to talk about it. Each and every culture has its own traditional clothing. For the Japanese, it's the kimono. This stylish robe-like garment has found popularity all over the world. However, the traditions and guidelines surrounding kimono wearing, or kitsuke, are more elaborate than most people know. Let's take a look at several prevailing examples of this elegant and detailed form of dress. Furisode. One of the most colorful kinds of kimono is the furisode. This style is remarkable for its long, swaying rectangular sleeves, which can reach up to 114 centimeters in length. These kimono are intensely colorful with eye-catching patterns.They're mainly worn by girls and young single women at ceremonies like weddings, coming-of-age day, and the 753 festival for young children. Over the kimono is an obi, a wide silk belt that can be tied in various decorative knots at the back. Komon. With shorter sleeves and more modest repeated patterning, the komon is a daily wear kimono style for women in their mid-20s and above.While many komon designs are multicolored, a variation called Edo komon has patterns of tiny white dots on single-colored silk for a beautifully subtle effect. Unlike with furisode, the obi used with komon is generally secured in the simpler square-shaped drum knot. Yukata. Known to be the least formal kimono option, yukata are distinct from other kimono styles in several ways.For one, they're made of breathable cotton or linen instead of silk, so they're comfortable to wear in the summer. For another, they aren't usually worn with the specified full-body undergarments that other kimono require. The corresponding obi are also narrower. It's common to see people of all genders and ages wearing yukata to summer festivals or when unwinding at traditional hot springs and inns.Well,
this is a fun unit. It's culture, but it's also clothes. And you could say there's some art thrown in this as well, so it's kind of fun. I know that Japanese culture is very popular here in Taiwan, and I can see why. It's very interesting. And we're going to talk about an article of clothing today called the kimono, or as we say in America, kimono. We don't say kimono, we just say kimono. And it is quite beautiful if you run into someone who has a pretty special type. I didn't know there were so many varieties, Tom, until I read the article. I thought, I knew there were more fancy varieties you could buy, but I didn't know that they actually had very different uses and types of people who'd wear them. The one that I wore was just, sort of a costume for a play, but it was pretty, but it was so heavy and hot. We're going to talk about how each and every culture has its own traditional clothing. I love the Chinese style traditional clothing. It's my favorite in Asia. But I think the kimono's pretty. It's just not quite as convenient and comfortable to wear as some of the traditional Chinese clothing that we've seen.
Right, so we're describing kimono as art that you can wear. We're describing it as a stylish robe-like garment, and it has found popularity all over the world. The word garment is just another word for clothing, and we go on to say, however, the traditions and guidelines surrounding kimono wearing or kitsuke are more elaborate than most people know. So there's the word kitsuke, which I hope I pronounced correctly. I think in Japanese they kind of smudge that K together, kitsuke or something like that. And of course, they can be very elaborate. And kitsuke, of course, is the art and science of kimono wearing.
So it says here, let's take a look at several prevailing examples of this elegant and detailed form of dress. Remember, it's robe-like. A robe is something we wear as an outer covering on other clothes. For example, a bathrobe. In that case, you're probably naked underneath your bathrobe. But we also have robes that we wear over pajamas sometimes. Well, a robe usually is an outer layer of clothing that someone wears, and that's what these are like. So if something is prevailing, and here we're going to look at several prevailing examples of the kimono. It just means they're kind of widespread. You see them a lot in a particular area, or maybe in a particular time in history you will have seen something. There's a famous phrase in the Bible where it says, let God prevail. Here it means let God be more powerful or influential in your life, a bigger influence than people around you who are trying to get you to do bad things. But in this particular sentence, here prevail means just something that you see quite often in a particular area or maybe in a period of history.
Exactly. So we, of course, hope that justice prevails when there's an accident or something like that, or if there's a robbery, you want that to continue lasting on, and that's what the last thing is, what prevails, basically. So, yeah, we'll talk about some of the examples that still exist of this elegant and detailed form of dress. First of all, we're going to talk about furisode. Now, one of the most colorful kinds of kimono is the furisode. This style is remarkable for its long, swaying, rectangular sleeves, which can reach up to 114 centimeters in length. So here we have the word to sway, swaying. That means kind of moving back and forth like a dress does when a girl is dancing or walking down the street and maybe the wind is blowing. So the dress just kind of goes back and forth. In this particular case, we'll have sleeves. Those are where your arms are, and they will sway. They will move back and forth in a very colorful way.
We'll also use sway to talk about trees moving when there's a wind blowing through. The leaves were swaying, or the branches were swaying on the trees. Dancers will often just sway back and forth. Maybe the music's kind of slow. It's a slow tempo type of song, and a couple can be together dancing, but they're not really moving their feet. They're just swaying or moving back and forth slowly. So these are really long sleeves. I think these are really beautiful, but every time I see them, I think, wow, it would be hard to do anything because you have to pull them up before you can even get your hand out of them. So they're much longer than your arms are, and they are quite long. It says here, these kimono are intensely colorful with eye-catching patterns. What does it mean when they say intensely colorful?
Intense just means it's very strong. It's not normal. Like if you have colors in your photograph, maybe you have a function in your photo editor to intensify the colors, so the colors will really be saturated. You'll get really bright reds,
Stronger.
Bright greens, really strong colors. So yes, indeed, these are not subtle colors. They are intense colors, saturated colors, and they have these eye-catching patterns. Of course, we all are familiar with the various patterns that exist in Japanese culture. You see them on their dishware all the time, like the fish scales and stuff like that. They've got some interesting patterns on them, maybe with flowers and things like that. And they're mainly worn by girls and young single women at ceremonies like weddings, coming-of-age day, and the 753 Festival for Young Children. So, yeah, you probably won't see these worn by men so much. When I was looking for some examples on the internet there, all the pictures were of nice, pretty young girls wearing these garments. And, of course, they had the long sleeves that were hanging down from their arms, which probably makes it difficult to play basketball or volleyball with. So I would not recommend wearing this garment to play sports like that. But in any case, yes, you have, young girls, young single women wearing them at ceremonies, which is a formal occasion in which something has happened, like a wedding ceremony, a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah if you're Jewish, etc. There are various ceremonies. A funeral is also a kind of ceremony.
A ritual, a ceremony. Yeah, so they're quite special. I've never seen a guy wearing those very long sleeves. So, yeah, that makes sense. So, the furusode, I guess that's what it is. That is mostly something that's worn by women or girls. For special occasions, you could say, ceremonies or special occasions. Now, over the kimono is something called an obi, and that is the Japanese word for that really wide belt that gets tied around their waist. You need someone else to help you. You cannot put this on by yourself. You need someone who can know how it's not only wrapped around you, there's a special way, but they have to actually tie it for you as well. So that's called an obi, and it's usually made out of silk, and it has some various decorative knots at the back. Yeah, I watched actually a video on YouTube about different ways to tie the obi. I mean, I didn't know about this before, but it just was suggested to me as a video to watch, so I ended up looking at it for a while. It's really artistic, but again, you have to know what you're doing, and you need a friend or a family member to help you tie your obi if you're going to do this right.
Right. And remember, it's very traditional clothing for ceremonies and things like that, so it's not everyday wear by young women who are single. Okay, that brings us to the midway point in our lesson for today. Let's take a break and listen to our Chinese teacher, and we'll be right back to talk about the kimono and the yukata.
听众朋友大家好，我是安娜。我们今明2天要带大家来看一下日本传统文化艺术之美。什么东西呢？我们要来带大家来看看和服 kimono。 好，那当然我们知道每一个文化都会有自己的一个传统服饰啦。这个传统服饰啊，因为谈的不只是衣服，也有可能会谈到一些配件啦、身上的装饰啊、穿什么样的鞋子或袜子搭配啊等等。所以这个所谓的服饰啊，我们在第一段第一句最后一个字这个 clothing 这个字要特别注意，这个 clothing 指的是穿戴在身上的所有的这些服饰都叫做 clothing。那我们比较熟悉的 clothes 则指的是衣服、上衣或者是下衣。那跟它很像的另外2个字呢，一个是 cloth C-L-O-T-H cloth 它是布的意思，是集合名词哦。那另外一个是动词叫做 clothe C-L-O-T-H-E 它是一个及物动词，就是替某人穿上衣服，所以它常会用被动。好，那以上的4个简单的这个介绍呢，大家特别小心这4个字。那么对日本文化来说，当然 kimono 就是最能够代表日本的这种所谓的衣服咯。所以我们来看一下这个和服到底有哪一些种类。其实当然和服有分不同的种类，但是还有一些穿着的技巧，这真的就是很精细很复杂的。所以我们同样在第一段的地方请注意一下第4句。第4句这里有一个关系子句的简化，先行词是 however 后面也就是主词的 the traditions and guidelines 后面的 surrounding 一直到逗点这个地方，我们可以左右括号起来。那么 surrounding 它其实是一个关系子句的简化，原本应该是 which 或者是 that surround， 因为动词的 surround 就是环绕着的意思，所以到底要怎么穿呢？这些穿着的技巧，这些 kisuke 就非常的精细，非常的复杂。好，所以我们来看第一种哦。第一种和服叫做正袖。furisode 呢，它是一种很色彩缤纷的一种和服，这就是我们觉得很漂亮的一种，因为它的这个款式啊，就是有长而飘逸的长方形的袖子。好，我们在第2句特别注意一下， 这里有一个补充的关系子句，先行词是Its long swaying rectangular sleeves， 逗点之后的 which 一直到句尾就是用来修饰这个所谓的长方形袖子。这个补充说明这长方形袖子，那什么时候要穿呢？主要是女生啊，年轻的单身女性在婚礼、成人式或者是儿童7、5、3节的时候，就可以穿着这样子的一个正袖这种和服。不过当你说这个儿童7、5、3节是什么呢？其实在日本啊，小孩子到了3岁、5岁跟7岁的时候呢，都要到神社去参拜。3岁的时候是男生女生都要去参拜，5岁的时候是小男生要去参拜，那么女生是满了7岁的时候呢，要到神社去参拜。这是日本的儿童7、5、3节，那这个时候他们就会穿这种正袖的服装。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, guys. It's our culture unit, and we're talking about some Japanese culture that people can relate to here, I'm sure. And that's the kimono, a type of traditional clothing that the Japanese have worn for hundreds and hundreds of years, if not thousands. So for the Japanese, it's really important to have a piece of traditional clothing in their closet. Sometimes these are worn at special events. You could wear them at things like a wedding ceremony, or we found out that sometimes these girls and young women, single women that is, they will wear the furisode at something called a coming of age day, or maybe the 753 festival, and that's held for young kids. Now, this furisode kimono is very special because it has these very long rectangular sleeves. I think these are beautiful. It's one of my favorite kimonos. But like I was saying earlier, you really can't do very much because your hands are covered by those sleeves. They're so long. But they sure look dramatic and beautiful.
Okay, so now we're going to go on and talk about another variety of kimono, and it's called the komon. With shorter sleeves and more modest repeated patterning, the komon is a daily wear kimono style for women in their mid-20s and above. Okay, so this particular variety of kimono has shorter sleeves, so they don't have the long square sleeves like the furisode have. In this particular case, they're shorter. And then the patterning, or the patterns on the cloth is more modest. Okay, if something's modest, it's not as obvious, it's not as intense, it's not as saturated, it's a little less noticeable, it's more subtle, you could say. So yeah, you get this patterning which repeats over and over. That's what patterns do. But the patterns are more modest and the colors are not as bright. And it's a daily wear kimono style for women who are in their mid-20s or older. So I guess they probably wear this in their everyday lives for various occasions.
For modest here, you could also say it kind of means just limited, not as much. As Tom was saying, it's not intense or something that's quite dramatic. It's more subtle. Moderate to me, just in my mind, I think sometimes moderate would be like medium size. So modest just means kind of that medium. Not too much, but not too little either. So the kimono is the daily wear kimono style. And this is for women, as Tom said, in their mid-20s and above. So the really young girls or the teenagers won't be wearing this one. So while many kimono designs are multicolored or have a lot of different colors, there is a variation called the Edo kimono, and it has patterns of tiny white dots on single-colored silk for a beautifully subtle effect. This word subtle means you can barely see it. Unless somebody points it out to you, it would be hard to notice. So if you have a pattern that's subtle, it's even less obvious than a pattern that's more modest. That would be the comparison between the two. we have lots of different things where we have variations on things. So, for example, you might have a smartphone, but there isn't just one brand. There are lots of different variations of the smartphone. There are lots of different models, you could say. So a variation is just a difference in something, but all of that one thing has something in common. The smartphone, of course, you can make calls and usually you can surf the internet, but there are a lot of different variations of the phone. But here we've got a variation of the kimono that we're kind of introducing or explaining today. And this one called the Edo, it has patterns of tiny white dots, again, on just one single colored silk. I think this would be the one I would want.
Right. From a distance, it probably looks like a single color, but when you get closer, you see the little patterns there. They're more subtle, they're more modest, they're not as obvious. And, of course, again, we're describing them, or this particular kimono, as having a subtle effect. Again, subtle, as you said, means not so noticeable. For women who are interested in guys, for example, they can't, usually in most cultures, they can't come out, hey, man, I really like you. I'd like to go out on a date with you. Now, guys get turned off by that directness from women. So you got to be more subtle. You got to figure out ways to get his attention without being too obvious. You got to be subtle, okay, in the tone of your voice or something, or how you move or something like that. And again, this has a more subtle effect in the cloth and the patterns. And unlike with furisode, the obi used with komon is generally secured in the simpler square-shaped drum knot. So if you look at the knots with is it the one before the furisode? It's kind of big, it's kind of elaborate, and you're going to have somebody who knows what they're doing to tie that knot. This particular obi, the sash or the belt, is tied with a simpler knot. Of course, different ways to tie a rope or cloth are referred to as knots. Like if you're in the Navy or in the Boy Scouts or whatever, they teach you all sorts of knots, how to tie these different knots. And these also exist in clothing. Of course, China is known for its knotting handicrafts. You know, those knots that they have hanging from these various decorations. There's a culture of knotting there, and you can learn to do that. It's kind
macrame.
of fun. Kind of like that, exactly, like weaving different pieces of cloth together or ropes together to make different patterns. And yes, indeed, this knot is square-shaped. It's the drum knot. I guess it looks kind of like a drum.
I guess the best place to learn how to do this, if you don't have an expert in your area, is just to get online. I also remember watching a video about the British Museum, and they had an expert there who her only job was to take care of kimonos, but she was a knot expert as well. It's just fascinating that there are specialists in things like this, but there are. Now, finally, we've got the yukata kimono, and this one's the least formal of all the ones we're going to talk about. And this is probably one you would stick to in the hot summer weather. Notice here in the first sentence of the last paragraph, we're saying yukata are instead of yukata is, or the yukata is, because we don't put S's on Japanese words to make them plural. We do in America because we don't know. But here we're just talking about yukata in the plural. So we can say the yukata are distinct from other kimono styles in several ways. If you're distinct from other things, it means there's something about you that's unique that other people don't have. So it's easy to recognize that something's different if it's distinct from other things in the same kind of category.
Right, yukata actually means bathrobe in the kanji there. And of course, as a result, they're more common. They're made of breathable cotton, which means it's kind of cool. Linen is very cool in the summer. Silk can be quite hot. So if these garments are made of breathable cotton or linen, they're comfortable to wear in the summer. For another, they aren't usually worn with the specified full-body undergarments that other kimono require. Your undergarments would be the clothes you wear under your clothes, like your underwear, your bra, your jockstrap if you're an athlete, etc. Those are undergarments. And the corresponding obi are also narrower. So if something corresponds, it matches. So, of course, these types of kimono, the yukata, has to have an obi as well. So the obi on this particular garment, the corresponding obi, well, they are narrower, they're not as wide, and they're probably easier to tie.
That sounds nice. Now, it's common to see people of all genders and ages wearing yukata to summer festivals or when unwinding or relaxing at traditional hot springs and inns. When you talk about genders, these days it's getting kind of complicated. We used to just have two genders, and now we have many, I guess. So people of all types, whether you're masculine, feminine, or something of both, you can wear this particular one. Again, it's the least formal of all the ones we're going to be introducing, and it's also quite cool. So this is something you want to shoot for if you're living in a tropical area of the world like we are.
Right, and you can unwind at the hot springs and inns. You can relax and have a good time. And there you have it, today's introduction to various types of kimono. We've got some more for you next time, but right now we're going to say goodbye after we listen to our Chinese teacher.
那么接下来的第二种呢，就是小文。那小文这种和服呢，它的袖子就比较短一点，但是呢，它的图案设计是比较重复性，那稍微朴素一些，通常都是25岁以上的日本女性穿着这种和服款式。好，我们特别注意一下第二句，句首的 while 在这里不是代表时间哦，而是虽然 although 的意思，我们是根据上下文的文意去推测。这里的 while 在这个月当中呢，有好几天都会拿来当成 although 或者是代表前后子句的对比。好，虽然这些小文的设计呢，有一些是多色的，而且称呼为所谓的江户小文这样子的变形，其实有一些呢会有带一些小小的白点的图案，就是会有一点特别的效果。不过呢，它跟正袖不一样的是，通常它的腰带是固定在比较简单的一个方形骨节当中。那么同样在这一句话当中，我们看到一个关系子句的简化，先行词是 the obi， 也就是腰带的部分。后面3个字可以左右括号哦 ，used with common。好，那么这里的 used 前面省略的是 which 或 that 跟 be 动词的 is， 所以它是一个关系子句的简化。那么接下来的第三种，我们就看到浴衣咯。浴衣则是被认为是最不正式的一种和服的选项。好，我们来看一下浴衣这一段的第一句。其实它是一个分词构句哦。如果我们在句首一开始看到动词 ing 或者是 pp， 然后接下来看到逗点的话，基本上它真正要描述的主词都会是逗点之后的主词，也就是浴衣 yukata 这个名词。好，那么它是什么样的一个分词构句呢？它的连接词有可能是 when 或者是 because 或者是 if 跟 although 这些连接词的省略。那么后面的主词，因为我们谈到的是浴衣被大家熟知为是最不正式的和服选项，所以连接词跟动词删掉之后，主词跟后面的 yukata 又一样，所以会直接留下所谓的 pp。好，它是一个分词构句。那为什么它是最不正式的一种和服选项呢？这里有提到2个原因，特别注意在英文当中，如果你要分别讲2个原因的时候，通常可以使用这种转成词语，一个出现在第2句前面的 for one， 第3句前面的 for another， 所以当我们在描述原因的时候，不一定都只会用 because。 以上是我们今天介绍的3种和服，我们明天还有另外3种和服要介绍哦，明天见，拜拜。
That's it for today, everybody. Make sure you join us again next time when we continue to talk about the kimono, art you can wear. Please join us then. From all of us here at English Digest, I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
Bye.